Eli's Dream Journey Through Canada. Chapter 1. Eli felt the moment the dream began, not in the dramatic plunge of reality slipping away, but in the quiet shift of sound and scent. The distant hum of traffic was replaced by the soft rustle of wind through pine. His eyes opened to find himself standing along the shores of Vancouver's English Bay. Early morning light glistened on the water, and the cool coastal air kissed his cheeks. Behind him, the glass towers of downtown Vancouver shimmered like modern mountains under a pale blue sky. He stepped forward, his shoes crunching against the fine gravel of the seawall path. Around him, joggers and cyclists moved with a rhythm that felt rehearsed, as if this was a city choreographed in calm. Stanley Park loomed ahead, a green island of serenity nestled within the city, its towering trees guarding its secrets. As Eli wandered deeper into the park, the scents of cedar, wet earth, and blooming cherry blossoms filled the air. The canopy overhead filtered sunlight into golden specks that danced at his feet. He paused at Brockton Point, where a collection of towering totem poles stood like ancient sentinels. Each one told a story, of eagles, whales, thunderbirds, and ancestral spirits, carved into vibrant wood. Eli felt a gentle reverence wash over him. He ran his fingers along the grooves of one pole, feeling the craft, the memory, the voice of time itself. As the morning warmed, he made his way toward Granville Island. The public market buzzed with quiet life. Vendors offered up fresh baked bread, glossy berries, and steaming cups of dark-roasted coffee. Eli chose a pastry filled with berries and a drink infused with maple, not too sweet, but smooth and warm, like a whispered song. He sat by the harbor and watched a group of children chase seagulls while a street violinist played a melody so tender it seemed to shape the air itself. Behind him, an artist painted the scene, boats rocking gently in the harbor, mountains in the distance, a sky that felt like it had no ceiling. As the sun dipped into the Pacific, painting the sky in coral and gold, Eli felt a breeze pass through the trees, not cold, but cool with intention. He leaned back, his eyes fluttering closed, and let the maple-sweet wind carry him deeper into the dream. Chapter 2. When Eli opened his eyes again, he was on the deck of a ferry. The sea around him was cloaked in fog, and the horizon was invisible, as though the world had shrunk to just this moment. The ferry hummed softly, cutting a path through glassy water that gently swelled beneath the weight of morning mist. He leaned against the railing and caught a glimpse of motion in the distance, the graceful arc of an orca's fin breaking the surface. A pod followed in silence, surfacing and diving like shadows stitched into the sea. The sight stirred something ancient in him, as if he had seen this before in a dream within a dream. Vancouver Island rose ahead, a silhouette of dark greens and grays. Once docked, Eli stepped off the boat and into a land that smelled of moss, cedar, and rain. The Pacific Rim Highway curved like a ribbon through dense rainforest. He drove, though he didn't know how the car appeared, letting the curves of the road guide him deeper into nature's embrace. At Cathedral Grove, he stepped out and walked into a realm of giants. Towering Douglas firs stretched hundreds of feet into the air, some over 800 years old. Their trunks were wide enough to hide a small room behind. He tilted his head back until he could see no sky, only the layered branches reaching into eternity. The forest was alive with sound, the drip of dew from fern fronds, the chirp of hidden birds, the slow rustling breath of the canopy above. He felt small, but not insignificant, rather, like a welcome guest in a timeless temple. By late afternoon, he arrived in Tofino, a coastal town that felt more like a whisper than a place. Surfers danced across waves, children built castles in damp sand, and ravens croaked from driftwood posts. He wandered to Chesterman Beach, where the tide stretched the horizon, and the sand gleamed like bronze. His room that night was a small cedar cabin with a wood stove and a window facing the sea. He sat on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, and listened as the rain began to fall, slow at first, then steady, a lullaby of droplets on leaves and rooftop. The fire cracked. The ocean sang. Somewhere beneath the waves, he imagined the orcas still swimming, still speaking in deep, melodic tones. And just like that, sleep took him again. Chapter 3. Eli's dream shifted once more, and now he found himself seated by a large train window. The famed Rocky Mountaineer rolled along a track that carved through snow-capped mountains. Vast wilderness stretched in all directions, pine-covered valleys, glaciers catching sunlight, rivers running fierce and cold. He pressed his forehead to the glass, his breath fogging a soft circle. Outside, elk grazed in meadows bathed in morning light. Eagles soared above cliffs. The train itself felt timeless, polished wood paneling, soft leather seats, the gentle clink of teacups as attendants served breakfast with knowing smiles. They passed spiral tunnels and crossed bridges that hovered over rushing rivers. Time lost its grip. It could have been morning or late afternoon, hours or days. Eli simply existed, witness to beauty that needed no name. The train paused in Lake Louise, and Eli stepped down. The lake was even more stunning than any photograph, water so turquoise it felt unreal, ringed by snow-dusted peaks and whispering spruce trees. He walked the shoreline slowly, breathing deeply. The air was thin, but invigorating. He dipped his fingers into the lake. It was glacial cold, but clean and pure. In Banff, he wandered the charming streets, browsed cozy bookstores, and took a cable car up Sulphur Mountain, where the world below looked like a painting in motion. He ended the day at Banff Upper Hot Springs, submerged in warm, healing water with mountains all around and a twilight sky above. A mountain goat appeared near the edge of the hill, just as he stepped out to dry. It stood still for a long time, watching him with curious eyes before it turned and disappeared into the trees. Eli stood there, wrapped in a towel, feeling the heat of the springs fade from his skin and the cold air wrap gently around his shoulders. The stars were just beginning to appear, and he felt the dream deepen once more, not ending, but simply turning the page. Chapter 4. Eli awoke beneath a sky painted in prairie gold. The train was gone, replaced by wide-open fields swaying like oceans of wheat. He stood on the edge of a hill overlooking the vastness of Alberta's plains, where the sun hung low and bright, casting long shadows and gilding every blade of grass. He walked toward the city of Calgary, where the prairie met glass and steel. Its skyline rose suddenly, as if sculpted by wind and ambition. The Bow River cut through the city like a living vein, lined with bike trails and parks. Eli joined a crowd moving toward the Calgary Stampede grounds, the city's heart beating in rodeo rhythm. The air buzzed with excitement and the scent of sweet kettle corn and fresh hay. He wandered through the fairgrounds where laughter echoed from the Ferris wheel and horses paraded in polished gear. Cowboys and cowgirls, weathered and smiling, moved with confident grace. A child offered Eli a maple taffy stick, and he thanked her, savoring the sweet crystallized syrup melting on his tongue. He took a seat in the arena stands as the evening rodeo began. The crowd roared as riders challenged gravity, clinging to bucking broncos in midair spectacles of power and grace. Drums pounded and boots stomped, the rhythm of the stampede ran through Eli's chest like a second heartbeat. Later, with the sun bleeding into the horizon, a country band played under a canopy of string lights. Families swayed in circles, couples spun barefoot in the grass, and old men tapped their hats in time to the beat. Eli danced with strangers who felt like cousins, laughing freely. The music was a language older than speech. As the sky darkened fully, fireworks erupted overhead. Bursts of red, blue, and gold bloomed into the night. Eli tilted his head back and let the explosions reflect in his eyes. A child beside him whispered, "It's like magic rain," and Eli smiled, knowing she was right. As the last echo faded into the hills, Eli walked the quiet river path back toward the edge of the city. The night was cool and gentle, and the golden prairie whispered his name as he drifted once again into sleep. Chapter 5. This time, Eli found himself walking through fields under a sky so vast it felt like a cathedral. The sun was just rising over Saskatchewan, casting a soft, amber light that shimmered across the prairie like silk. The wheat fields rolled like waves, whispering in the wind. He followed a dirt path that led to a small city nestled along a river, Saskatoon. The South Saskatchewan River glistened beneath a network of graceful bridges. As he crossed one, the city unfolded around him, clean, quiet, and humming with gentle life. Trees lined the banks like guardians. Canoes drifted on the water. The occasional jogger nodded in peaceful solidarity. He rented a bike and followed the Miwasan Trail, a ribbon of green that hugged the river's curves. It led him past sculpture gardens, community orchards, and sunlit parks. The quiet was not empty, it was rich, filled with the chirp of prairie birds and the rustle of long grass. In the afternoon, he visited a cultural center focused on the Plains Cree and Metis peoples. There, he saw beadwork so intricate it shimmered like stars. He listened to the recorded voice of an elder tell stories of wind spirits, trickster crows, and rivers that remember. Eli felt something open in his chest, a connection, a reverence, a stillness. For lunch, he visited a farmer's market beside a red-bricked warehouse filled with music and laughter. He bit into warm bannock topped with Saskatoon berry jam. The flavor was sweet and earthy, the berries carrying a taste like memory. Children played nearby, chasing bubbles blown by a street performer with silver hair. The man winked at Eli and said, "The bubbles remember where you've been. That's why they float." As dusk settled, Eli stood on the Broadway bridge and watched the city glow gold. Lights flickered on in cottages, cafes, and concert halls. A gentle wind stirred, and the sky began to shift. At first, just faint green wisps, but then brighter, stronger. The northern lights painted the heavens above Saskatoon. They shimmered and waved as if dancing to music only the sky could hear. People gathered along the riverbanks, phones forgotten, mouths open in quiet awe. Eli lay in the grass, the lights above, the river beside him, the earth below. He felt wrapped in light, in peace, in wonder. And so, without needing to move, he dreamed again. Chapter 6. The lights above became the stars of another sky, one stretched above the gentle city of Winnipeg. Eli awoke in the heart of the Forks, where two rivers met, the Red and the Assiniboine. It was morning, crisp and full of potential. Around him, the old train station bustled with new life. The market pulsed with smells, cinnamon buns, pierogies, cedar tea, and sounds, fiddle tunes, soft jazz, First Nations drumming. He wandered slowly, tasting here, listening there, soaking in the harmony of cultures layered like the rings of a tree. He found himself drawn toward a structure like no other, the Canadian Museum for Human Rights. It rose from the earth like a stone-and-glass mountain, its spire reaching for the sky. Inside, he wandered through exhibitions of resilience, resistance, and hope. His reflection stared back at him from panels etched with stories of struggle, not to shame, but to inspire. One quote stayed with him, "Hope is the thing with feathers." He looked up to see feathers suspended in glass, and for a moment, he imagined they fluttered in the dream breeze. Outside, he walked the paths of the Assiniboine Park, where snowy owls perched in silence and families picnicked beneath copper trees. He rode a miniature train with laughing children and sat in a sculpture garden where the wind played music through hanging steel chimes. Evening brought a new scene, the Exchange District. Old warehouses, now reborn into cafes, lofts, and studios, buzzed with youthful energy. Poets read under streetlights. A saxophone whispered from an upstairs window. A couple danced in an alleyway to a song only they could hear. Eli followed the sound of drums into a small theater, where a puppet show was beginning. The tale was simple, a Metis girl lost in a forest who finds her way home by following the voice of her ancestors. The puppets were carved wood and cloth, but the story felt real and deep and true. As the audience applauded, Eli felt the warmth of connection, across cultures, across time, across dreams. Outside, snow began to fall, soft and deliberate, covering the cobblestones in a hush. He walked along the river, the city glowing behind him. Somewhere, a lullaby played on a flute. The snowflakes touched his cheeks like blessings, and as he closed his eyes, the dream took him once more, northward, always deeper. Chapter 7. Eli's next dream opened with silence, the kind of silence that felt sacred. He was bundled in a thick parka, standing on frozen ground that stretched in all directions. A small town lay behind him, sleepy and snow-covered, Churchill, Manitoba. The tundra was stark and stunning. Wind carried the scent of ice and something wilder, the musk of unseen creatures. He boarded a tundra buggy, a strange, lumbering vehicle with giant wheels designed to navigate the Arctic's frozen terrain. The guide, a woman with deep-set eyes and a voice like river stones, said, "We're in polar bear country now. Be still. Be open." They rumbled across icy trails under a slate-colored sky. A few kilometers in, the guide raised a hand. Everyone stilled. From behind a ridge of snow, a polar bear emerged. It moved with grace, despite its size, a ghost of muscle and fur. It sniffed the air, turning toward them. For a moment, its eyes met Eli's. Time suspended. The bear blinked once, then continued walking, snow crunching beneath its massive paws. "That one's a wanderer," the guide said. "They dream while walking. Just like you." Eli sat in stillness as the tundra buggy continued its quiet journey. They saw more bears, and a few Arctic foxes darting through the snow like spirits. The cold bit at his cheeks, but it was invigorating, cleansing. He touched his breath in the air like it was something tangible. That night, he stayed in a small lodge overlooking the frozen Hudson Bay. The sky began to shift, slowly, then suddenly. The aurora borealis unfolded above him in ripples of green, pink, and violet. The lights pulsed, spiraled, and danced in silence. It was like watching music written across the sky. Eli lay back in the snow, unafraid of the cold. He felt tears sting his eyes, not from sadness but from awe. The northern lights weren't just beautiful, they were alive. He imagined ancient travelers reading messages in the sky, stories told without words. Somewhere behind him, a drum began to beat softly. He turned to find the guide sitting beside a small fire, eyes closed, tapping a rhythm older than time. She sang softly in Cree, the notes low and comforting. Eli didn't understand the words, but he felt them settle into his bones. As the fire crackled and the aurora danced, he closed his eyes once more, the heartbeat of the earth carrying him into deeper sleep. Chapter 8. When Eli next opened his eyes, he was afloat in silence, not in snow this time, but on still water. He sat in a wooden canoe, gliding through the misty embrace of Algonquin Provincial Park in Ontario. The lake was a mirror, perfectly reflecting the tall pines and soft clouds above. The air smelled of pine needles, loam, and the faint sweetness of morning dew. A loon called, its voice long and haunting, echoing across the water. Eli dipped his paddle gently, barely rippling the surface. The mist curled like spirits as he glided through narrow channels and open bays, his body relaxing with every soft stroke. On the shore, he stepped out onto moss-covered stone and hiked a winding trail through forest alive with birdsong. He saw deer, their eyes wide and calm, and squirrels chittering above. Sunlight filtered through amber leaves, dappling the ground in gold. By afternoon, he arrived in Toronto, Ontario's largest city, a pulse of energy after the calm of nature. Yet even here, the dream did not rush. He wandered the harborfront, where sailboats bobbed on Lake Ontario. Street performers juggled, danced, and played music from every corner of the world. In Kensington Market, colors exploded, murals, spices, fabrics, and accents from a dozen countries mingled in a joyful kaleidoscope. Eli sipped chai from one vendor, then tasted Caribbean patties from another. Everything was flavor, story, and soul. Later, he climbed the CN Tower. From the top, the city spread beneath him like a board game, small, ordered, alive. But what drew his eye was the lake, stretching far into the horizon, mirroring the sky in deep, endless blue. That evening, he walked through High Park, where fireflies danced above grassy trails. Families picnicked. Musicians played softly under oaks. He sat by a sculpture of migrating geese, their wings frozen in bronze, and felt the subtle ache of movement, of time, of change. As night fell, the lights of Toronto sparkled like constellations brought down to earth. Eli closed his eyes, his breath slowing with the rhythm of the streetcars, footsteps, laughter, and lake wind. Chapter 9. The sound came before the sight, a deep, endless roar that seemed to rise from the ground. Eli stood at the edge of a path lined with flower beds in full bloom. Ahead, the mist rose like smoke from a sacred altar. Then he saw it, Niagara Falls. 3 massive waterfalls thundered over the cliff, their combined force staggering. Horseshoe Falls curved like the edge of the world, crashing into a churning basin below. Rainbows hovered in the mist, bending light into blessing. Eli felt the spray on his face and stepped closer. He joined a small group boarding a boat, donning the classic red poncho. As they approached the falls, the roar became a language, ancient, powerful, clear. It was the sound of water never ending, of stories being told over and over. The boat entered the mist, and for a moment, everything disappeared. He couldn't see the sky, the water, or the boat. Just white. Just sound. He closed his eyes and let it wash through him. The falls were cleansing him, of fear, of doubt, of time itself. Back on land, he explored Niagara-on-the-Lake, a storybook town with horse-drawn carriages, ivy-covered inns, and bakeries that smelled like cinnamon and memory. He sampled ice wine in a vineyard that sloped gently toward the horizon and wandered through gardens where monarch butterflies floated like petals on air. At night, he stayed in a hotel room overlooking the illuminated falls. The water was lit in deep purples, icy blues, and warm ambers. He sat on the balcony, wrapped in a soft blanket, sipping herbal tea. A woman nearby sang softly in French. A child asked, "Do the falls ever stop?" and the mother answered, "Not even in dreams." As the night deepened, Eli let the roar become a lullaby. The power of the falls faded into rhythm, into heartbeat, into breath. And with that, he slept again. Chapter 10. Eli's dream took him through time before place. He was walking cobblestone streets in light that shimmered like candle flame, golden and flickering. The air smelled of fresh bread, old stone, and softly falling snow. He looked around and realized he was in old Quebec City, a place where history didn't feel like the past, but like a living story told in every building, every breath. He wandered through narrow lanes where wrought iron balconies curled like lace above arched windows. Gas lamps lined the streets, glowing warmly in the early evening. Street musicians played accordions, and soft laughter echoed from stone cafes. The language of the city was French, but Eli didn't need to translate it. The meaning was in the mood, the eyes, the slow pace of every smile. He passed under the arched gate of the old town walls and made his way to Place Royale, where snow dusted the rooftops like powdered sugar. Tourists sipped mulled cider, and children fed the pigeons that cooed and strutted like tiny princes. Eli stopped to listen to a violinist whose notes rose into the cold air like smoke from a hearth. The melody made his eyes sting, not from sadness, but from a kind of deep remembering. Drawn uphill, he climbed toward Chateau Frontenac, its copper roof catching the last light of the sun like the crown of a sleeping giant. Inside, the warmth wrapped around him like velvet. A bellhop nodded and said, "Welcome," before pointing him toward a lounge with roaring fireplaces and old bookshelves. Eli curled into a chair and read from a leather-bound book he didn't recognize, but which seemed to know him. It was full of love letters from winters past, stories of travelers who had found something eternal between snowstorms and sips of cocoa. Outside again, he took a horse-drawn carriage through the Quartier Petit Champlain, where shop windows glowed with amber light and evergreen garlands hung from every door. The snow had begun to fall more steadily now, catching in his lashes and softening every sound. The driver hummed a lullaby in French, and Eli leaned back, watching the lanterns blur as the dream moved gently forward. In that moment, he understood that this city didn't just preserve history, it kept it warm. And in doing so, it had room for his story, too. Chapter 11. The dream did not carry Eli far, just downriver to a city full of fire and jazz, Montreal. He arrived in the early evening, when the sky was deep blue and the streets shimmered with recent rain. The scent of espresso, baked bread, and distant cigarette smoke mingled in the air. It felt like a secret waiting to be shared. The old stone alleys of old Montreal glowed with life. Couples walked arm in arm under umbrellas, and string lights danced above patios filled with steaming bowls of poutine and laughter in two languages. He wandered the banks of the St. Lawrence River, past silver sculptures and children playing in puddles. Up on Mount Royal, he joined a silent crowd of dreamers gazing out at the skyline below. Montreal sparkled like a constellation pulled down from the heavens and scattered across the earth. From the summit, the city's rhythm became clear, not frantic, but full, like a well-kept heartbeat. Later, in the plateau, he followed the pulse of distant saxophones to a jazz club tucked behind an old bookshop. A single red light hung above the door. Inside, everything was music. A quartet played without a single wasted note. The singer had a voice like midnight velvet, low, smoky, and full of stories. Eli sat in the back, sipping a bitter espresso, letting the music wrap around him. People whispered and kissed and closed their eyes as the music curled through the air like incense. He didn't know how long he stayed, an hour, a lifetime. During a break, the singer came to sit beside him. "First time here?" she asked in French accented English. "In this life, maybe," he answered. She smiled, as though she understood, and reached out to adjust the scarf around his neck. "Well then," she whispered, "let it become part of you." Outside, snow began again. Not the soft, delicate flakes of Quebec, but heavier, rounder ones that thudded gently on rooftops and turned alleyways into rivers of silver. As he walked back through Rue Saint-Denis, the city seemed to exhale around him, music, memory, and warmth blending into one. By the time he reached his room, he was not tired, but content. Montreal had not drained him, it had filled him, note by note, smile by smile. He curled beneath a heavy blanket and let the dream draw him eastward once more, into the gentle embrace of the sea. Chapter 12. The waves were calling when Eli arrived next. He stood on the rocky cliffs of Peggy's Cove, Nova Scotia, where the iconic lighthouse stood like a sentinel over the Atlantic. The ocean wind wrapped him in salt and softness, and the horizon stretched so far it seemed to bend time itself. He wandered the weathered fishing village, where lobster traps lined the docks and colorful houses clung to the hills like sea-touched dreams. A fisherman named Noel invited Eli into his kitchen for chowder, thick, steaming, rich with memory. They didn't speak much. The sea did all the talking, crashing outside the window in a slow, familiar rhythm. In Halifax, Eli walked along the waterfront boardwalk where tall ships swayed and musicians strummed folk ballads about sailors, storms, and homecomings. A small child offered him a shell, saying, "It whispers if you listen right." And so he held it to his ear, and heard not the ocean, but a lullaby. He crossed the Confederation Bridge into Prince Edward Island, where the earth was red and soft, and the sky hung low and gentle. Fields rolled in greens and golds, and lupins bloomed in violet clusters along winding country roads. He visited Green Gables, wherein might have once walked, and imagined himself writing letters by oil lamp. That night, in a bed and breakfast by the shore, the wind hummed through the cracks of old wooden walls. A storm brewed over the sea, lightning briefly revealing the curve of the waves. But inside, the fire crackled, and the owners sang Gaelic songs in the kitchen, songs about leaving, returning, and never really being gone. Eli dreamed of boats on the edge of the world, and seagulls that told secrets, and fishermen who knew the names of every star. Chapter 13, The Light of Newfoundland. His final chapter began in quiet stillness, standing on the edge of Cape Spear, the easternmost point in North America. The wind here was stronger, wilder. The sea stretched beyond comprehension, and Eli stood with it, the lighthouse rising behind him like a monument to all that came before. The cliffs below were jagged, dramatic, ancient. The waves crashed with conviction, but the sky above was clear. Puffins soared in dove, and a humpback whale breached far off the coast, its silver back catching the morning sun. In St. John's, colorful row houses climbed the steep hills like painted thoughts. Eli walked the jellybean row, taking in every vibrant hue, reds like laughter, blues like longing, yellows like music. He sat in a harbor pub, where the musicians didn't play for the people, but with them. A fiddle, a bowron drum, a voice full of salt and sky. The room danced. Even those who didn't rise from their chairs tapped their feet. A woman next to him passed him a spoon and said, "Keep rhythm or get out." He laughed and joined in. Later, in Trinity, a coastal village where time moved like fog, Eli stayed in a cottage near the cliffs. He hiked through the tablelands, where the earth was bare, ancient, and wise, orange rock from the mantle of the earth itself. No trees grew there, only quiet, and the sound of the wind whispering truths too old to name. That night, as he sat watching the stars prick into the velvet sky, a man sat beside him with a lantern. "You've come far," he said. Eli nodded. "I think I'm waking up." The man smiled. "Maybe. But the dream's part of you now." And with that, the man vanished. The lantern remained, glowing gently. Eli stood, the stars above, the Atlantic breathing below, and whispered his thanks, to the dream, to Canada, to the quiet parts of himself he had rediscovered along the way. The wind carried it out to sea. And when Eli opened his eyes again, his room was still. But his heart was full, of oceans and forests, cities and stars, mountains and music. And the dream had never really ended. The end. Thank you for traveling with Eli to Canada.